Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for that lovely first keynote presentation. I'm going to talk to you today. I am going to talk to you today from the perspective of a curator. That's what I am. I'm not a museologist, so I'm going to talk to you from the benefit of personal experience and through primarily observation, looking, listening, trying to work out and understand what I think works well. I just to give a tiny personal anecdote. Emily, when you show that slide of the people looking at the cases, the thing that I was looking at was the wooden floor. It wasn't the cases, it wasn't the people. And that was because I worked with a designer once who said to me, in every room of our exhibition, we should create a different floor, different tactile surface. The audience may not recognise that, may not appreciate that, but we're going to try and convey something. Each part of the space has a different look and feel. We can, of course, do that because of budgetary concerns, but that little fact always stuck in my mind. And I work for a British Library in London. The British Library has in the region of maybe 200 million collection items. It's one of the largest libraries in the world, not just books and manuscripts. We have our National Sound Archive, a national newspaper collection. But one of the reasons for putting this slide up is that the architecture of the building, much like we have here at the National Library of Latvia, the building here is astonishing. The British Library was designed by an architect who was obsessed with shipbuilding. And if you see the profile of the side here, it is literally designed to be a ship. It is the ship of knowledge. And essentially everybody who visits the British Library is going on a journey. At the British Library, we do different types of exhibitions. So I put a few different examples up here on the screen just to show you as the outset, these are kind of the exhibitions I'm going to be drawing upon this morning. We do historical exhibitions such as Leonardo da Vinci and Alexander the Great and Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, but we're also minded to do exhibitions which reflect sort of themes and sort of more broader things like our animals and our experience of the natural world, or fantasy literature, or the fight for women's rights. And as just to explain, these are some of the exhibitions that I will be sort of reflecting on today, as in the sense that these are all exhibitions that the team that I work with at the British Library, Medieval Manuscripts, has worked with in different shapes and forms over the years. And I personally curated the Magna Carta exhibition. I curated the Our Shakespeare exhibition at the Library of Birmingham. I was the lead curator of Harry Potter, and most recently I was first the curator and then ultimately the lead curator of a Medieval Women exhibition, which I culminated a few months ago. And there we have it. I'm actually perhaps potentially the biggest critic of this exhibition. I mean, undeniably, I was there at the outset. I saw how it developed. We had ambitions for it. Sometimes they were realised, sometimes they weren't. But it's essentially always great to understand how people experience their exhibition, how they come out of it. I would say, if I was going to say my abiding principle of creating any exhibition, is I want people to leave feeling happy, to feel that they've learnt something, to go out of my exhibition, they've learnt one particular fact that they want to go away and tell somebody about. I want them to go out on an uplifting moment, but I do really want them to reflect, to be educated, but not necessarily to have that learning sort of foisted upon them. So as I don't come from a museological background, I just came up with what I actually think is what we want to define as success. Now, how do we quantify success? And I think that almost certainly ticket sales isn't necessarily the abiding fact. There are many, many other ways that we can actually understand and we can take pride in what we've achieved. Whether that might be attracting somebody to come to see our exhibition who has not set foot in our building before. Or that might be finding a different way to use the space, to use the exhibition galleries. Always take risks. always be open to the fact that not everything is going to work, not everything is going to be appreciated by every single visitor in the same way, because people obviously learn things in different ways. Attracting new audiences undeniably is a very important thing for the British Library, as undeniably it is for other institutions. And I also wanted to explain, and this was a slide I came up with before for who was involved in the creation of the Medieval Women exhibition at the British Library. I mean, of course, the curators are the most important. I'm joking, but seriously, but there are so many other people and many other teams involved in any exhibition. And it is a huge collaborative, participatory process. And there's certain things I want to gain out of this. I mean, one in particular is do not underestimate anybody who is involved. I mentioned security over there. I recently went to an exhibition at the National Library of Norway. As we were deinstalling an object, I asked a couple of the team members there, what was the impact of your exhibition? How did visitors what did visitors say about it? And they said, we're not really sure. And then a security guard, he'd been over listening to our conversation, came up to me, tapped me on my shoulder and said, well, this is what they did. And it turned out he'd been in the gallery for the duration of the entire exhibition. He'd witnessed everybody going around. He'd been the person who'd been introducing them to the objects. And it just really made me think, of course, everybody has a role and everybody learns and actually has an opportunity to share their knowledge with other people. I mean, the other thing I really want to impress upon people is that if you have an exhibition that everybody has the same ideas and the same thought processes, that's one way of going about things, but it's not actually going to produce the best outcome. People should have different opinions. People should approach things in different ways. We talk about cognitive diversity, but people do genuinely have different approaches and different ways of thinking about how the gallery is going to be designed or which objects to select. I always joke, the Medieval Women exhibition, I was the only man on the team. All my colleagues had a form of the name Helen. They're called Helen, Ellie, Elena, Helena, Ellie, and there was another lady called Freya. And I thought, Freya, thank goodness. And then she said to me, my middle name is Ellie. I was just like, gee. But the funny thing was, that we all had different opinions. And the reason I explain and want to sort of mention this to you all now is that actually, by disagreeing with people, you test what you want to achieve. You do sometimes, you might think, there's a bit of tension here, a bit of conflict, but you do actually get to a situation where you've actually tested all the different ideas and processes. So just to explain about what we could define as a successful exhibition. Medieval Women in their own words, ironically, I would say this is probably the least successful exhibition I've worked on in terms of visitor numbers, because like Harry Potter, every single session of every single day was sold out. Magna Carta was the second most visited exhibition ever at the British Library. So what did we have? Well, we had manuscripts on display, and as you'll discover, we did have other objects on display. We were fortunate enough to be able to borrow from places like the British Museum and the Louvre. Our loans budget was absolutely minimal, and we have to acknowledge that our resources are very limited, and what you have to be very careful what you can actually aim and what you can achieve. From our audience's marketing perspective, they set at what was a relatively modest visitor target of 45,000 people, and our exhibition received 65,000 visitors. So that was actually a huge uplift on what people were expecting. It did actually create some sort of challenges in the gallery itself, because it meant that it was more crowded than some of our colleagues had been appreciating and anticipating, relating to when the ticket entries were timed and so forth. There was a definition about what kind of categories of visitors. Delighted to attract more first-time visitors. We had a very significant number of female visitors, inevitably, and we had more visitors from outside London than was usually the case. So I'm really, really proud of that. One tiny thing I'd like to sort of say is that I don't think that actually we only audit ticket sales, i.e. people who pay or are registered as they come into the gallery. And in the case of some of the exhibitions I've worked on, it's also should be numbered in sort of other kinds of outreach. So a good example for our medieval women exhibition, there were some online seminars for school students, and one of them was attended by, say, 8,000 schools across the United Kingdom, one single session. And that, for me, is possibly, I'm much more sort of grateful for having been slightly involved in something like that than sort of registering sort of another half a dozen visitors through the actual door. So what I want to go through today is what I would just say from, basis of my personal experience, how I would try and create a successful exhibition and using the British Library as a case study. And these are some of my kind of key ideas. And obviously, undeniably, I would say getting the choice of your objects correct, how many you have, how you position them. If you're fortunate enough, how you can actually align objects, books in particular, with other types of media. Absolutely focus on the visitor experience. Even at the outset, I'm kind of making a mental picture for myself of how the visitors are going to approach the objects in our exhibition, which direction they're going to come from, what are they going to see first, what kind of interpretation do you need to show for them. Absolutely working in close collaboration with other people, immersion, really, really important to us at the British Library. I would just say, genuinely, have fun. It's just straightforward, but just like, you're in it for the benefit of so many other people, but you should really just be playful, have a great experience. And obviously, as I say, focus on the visitors at all times. Absolutely. My 4 guiding principles are to entertain, to engage, to educate people, to inspire people. I always focus on the educational one. I don't actually necessarily think that you are only singly trying to teach people. But you can do that kind of learning in ways that they don't necessarily realise or appreciate they're being taught something, but they're learning facts as they're going around your exhibition, different shapes and forms. And those are the things that may potentially lodge in their heads. So I've got a few kind of sort of ideas that I wish to share with you. And obviously, exhibits are a key to the creation of a successful exhibition. And as I've mentioned, I work at a place where we have quite a few books. But I do absolutely believe as well that as you go around an exhibition, you should be challenging people and testing all their different senses at any given time. So that means audio, that means vision, that means sense, touch, all those kind of different things. And these, I would say, are possibly the 3 of the most sort of significant exhibits I've ever had to work with. The one on the left, I can't remember who this lady is at the top of the screen. They came to see our exhibition. This is a tombstone of a man called Nicholas Flamel. Features heavily in the Harry Potter books. Apparently never died, although allegedly actually is based on a real person who lived in Paris in the 1400s. And his tombstone is actually kept at Cluny in Paris, a museum. And I thought that would be a great object to show in our exhibition. Our colleagues were sort of slightly less, you're never going to persuade them to lend that. So it was decided that I would write an email, approach their curators. If you approach the British Library, you may not hear back for a very long time. And forgive me, and that's how the way the exhibition processes work. But I do distinctly remember getting in touch with Cluny. I'd been to see it in person. It was hanging up there on a wall, way, way, way out of sight. You couldn't even look at it face to face. Sorry, gone back. There we go. You couldn't see it face to face. Anyhow, I emailed them. Within 24 hours, they come back to me and said, we've agreed to lend it to you. Thank goodness for that. On the bottom of the screen, though, this is a very, very fat book. This book was made in around the year 700. It's called Codex Amiatinus. It was made as a gift for the Pope, made in Northumbria in England. It was going to be carried all the way to Rome in about the year 716. Never actually reached there. It's now held in a library in Florence. We were able to borrow it for our Anglo-Saxon Kingdoms exhibition for the first time it ever left. It would ever come back to the UK, back to England for the first time in 1300 years. And that was an object that people were observed weeping in front of. suddenly people thought, how on earth has this object survived for so long? And it's back in the country where it was made. And the other one is a signature of a lady called Joan, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. And here, of course, some of the objects that we had in our medieval women exhibition. So, of course, books are really important to any exhibition, and I completely understand how difficult they can be. They're inanimate objects. They don't speak to you personally. You have to devise ways of introducing their stories. And I've often tried to do that by displaying them alongside other objects which relate to that person's history or to that period, or sort of like add extra layers. And so, for example, in the medieval women exhibition, we had ivory crosses like this one on the right-hand side, which we borrowed from the Louvre. We actually made, this is actually a model, not the real thing, because the real thing is too fragile, but we had a cast made of a very famous statue of a famous Queen of England called Eleanor of Castile, and we displayed that in the exhibition. Despite, we actually had notices in our exhibition at various pages that said, please touch. And the funny thing was, people aren't accustomed to doing that, so people were standing back and standing away. But you could generally if you really wanted to, you could put your arms around Eleanor. And I hope more people actually did do that. So this is one of the items that we showcased in the medieval women exhibition at the British Library. This is a letter written by a lady called Joan of Arc. She wrote it in November 1429 to a small town in France called Riom. She was engaged in a series of sieges at the time, and she wrote to the citizens of Riom requesting gunpowder and other military supplies in order to besiege a neighbouring town. And it is important and significant because it is the first letter in Joan of Arc's name that she actually added her signature to at the bottom right-hand corner. And if you look, it's actually really quite shaky. If you get to the middle, the letters N, but whether or not she hadn't put pen to paper before, and this is really demonstrates you're up close, you're actually seeing the person who, from that, historical vantage point centuries ago, who still has an impact today, but you can see their own handwriting, you can get inside their mind. And massively grateful to the town council of Riom in France for agreeing to lend the British Library this letter. Again, it had never left Riom since the year 1429, since it was written. And the moment that they said to us, thanks, I would say explicitly, to the good services of our colleagues at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris and the Archives Nationales, who really worked very hard with us and enabled us to reach out and borrow this letter. That transformed our exhibition. I would also say, and I will keep coming back to this, is that putting physical objects in an exhibition, i.e. 3D objects, does augment the visitor experience. And one that I thought did relatively well at this was an exhibition we mounted a few years ago. It happened in COVID, a very serious impact upon the exhibition. Exhibits were withdrawn, the exhibit list had to be rewritten 3 times, loan requests were approved and then rejected, and it all went round in circles. But that exhibition had an incredible number of objects on display, rings, portraits and so forth. And I still think of that, it's lodged in my mind as when you were looking at a book, behind it you saw the person who was connected with writing that particular object, so you could see their face as presented by a contemporary. And for me, that was hugely, hugely important. And we've talked already about how do you begin an exhibition. I'm a firm believer in less is best, and just have one object if possible at the beginning. And this was a little object at the beginning of our Anglo-Saxon Kingdoms exhibition in 2018. You notice it's not actually a book. It's actually an archaeological artifact. It's dates from around the year 500, made in Anglo-Saxon England. It's the first representation of what seems to be a human figure from Anglo-Saxon England. And again, it changed people's perceptions, because people, what am I expecting to see from this exhibition? A load of old books. I mean, one of the strange sort of audience sort of responses from the medieval women exhibition at the British Library. Not much of the feedback was negative, but what there was, some of the feedback said, "Oh, I wasn't expecting there to be books in your exhibition." It's like shocking but true. Shocking but true. You know, what else are you going to see in the exhibition? But actually, ironically, from a library's perspective, putting in, if you're able to achieve that, obtaining loans or different types of media to display is a really good point. And we did that again to quite good effect in the medieval women exhibition. We had a lion's skull on display in the exhibition. People often say, why? What's a lion's skull going to be? And obviously, there was a story behind it. There was a story about a Queen of England, Margaret of Anjou, in the 1440s, a French princess who was going to be married to the King of England. And there was a document which describes when she was making her journey to England in order to marry King Henry VI, they presented her with a huge number of gifts. And one of those was a lion cub. And then fast forward to the 1930s in England, at the Tower of London, which was a royal menagerie during the Middle Ages, they excavated the moat and they discovered the skulls of 2 lions, which are now kept at the Natural History Museum in London. And of those 2, one of them was radiocarbon dated almost exactly to the period when Margaret of Anjou's lion lived. So we use that as a demonstration. This is actually how she lived. Can you imagine having a pet lion? I mean, I've got a cat at home. She's really annoying. I mean, a lion would be many, many times above that. But another thing I really want to do is try to explain how, as a curator, I'm also sort of like an amateur designer. The people that I've helped to, well, I say people that I've helped to design exhibitions, the people that I've worked with, when they have been designing our exhibitions, will be aware of the fact that I like to understand how the exhibition is going to look and feel from a practical perspective. This is an exhibition that the British Library collaborated with the Library of Birmingham in 2016. And what you should understand is that the gallery in the Library of Birmingham is essentially just a cube. It's a square, almost like, it's bigger than this room, but it just has bare walls. And what we wanted to do was create a moment of like real performance, and in order to see the most important objects in the exhibition. So the designer came up with this idea: let's create a pavilion, and let's blow up an image, the most famous portrait of William Shakespeare himself. And then you'll see that's how we did it inside the exhibition, because on display was the first folio, and you couldn't see those items until you actually went into that gazebo, garden shed, how we want to describe it, in the middle of the exhibition. There are many other reasons for doing this, which the average visitor wouldn't have appreciated, but we were able to put CCTV on the wall, we were able to limit the light, which was going to reflect on the manuscripts. It was absolutely appropriate from a security point of view. But I'm really proud of the way that we took an empty gallery space and just put this particular sort of experience bang in the middle of it. And another example of inventive design, the designers I worked with on the Harry Potter exhibition did work in a completely different way. And that's always the case. Everybody has different approaches. They were really obsessed with the look and feel of the gallery space, less with the actual objects on display, but really with how the kind of performance of the exhibition. And lots of people commented to me, they said, the gallery is really dark and gloomy and atmospheric, just like Hogwarts. And I have to think personally, our gallery is always dark because that's what it's like for environmental reasons. But what they did, apart from recreating, they made the actual exhibition space actually feel like a library when you're inside. So these graphics, these were actually photographs taken from the King's Library at the British Library, blown up and reproduced around the walls. But every single room had a different look and feel. But often, if that was communicated, for example, through the way the lighting was designed, maybe the lightings were designed as broomsticks, or in the herbology section as flower pots, or in this section as upturned cauldrons. And again, as we've alluded to earlier, sometimes actually using physical replicas when you can't borrow the real thing. These are the tombs of 2 queens. One of them at the front is Elizabeth I of England. Behind her is her cousin, sort of nemesis, Mary, Queen of Scots. These are actually reproductions of their original tombs at Westminster Abbey in London. Dare I say, I do not think that Westminster Abbey would ever have been physically able to have loaned us the originals, but we did actually have reproductions made, which means that they're tactile. You can actually go up close with them, and again, it was really interesting and important to us. This was a culmination of that particular exhibition, to create a sense of atmosphere and actually have those real personages sort of lying right in front of the visitors. And again, finally, just one point on design. Coming back to the Shakespeare exhibition at the Library of Birmingham, the walls of that gallery are completely bare. But one thing that we did, a playful thing, I love being a little bit playful, is that on the left here, you actually see this is a door, this is the exit to the exhibition. Normally the door would have been just a blank, just like the door around here. And what we decided to do was to actually, we have this image, it's taken from a play called The Winter's Tale. The very famous last line of The Winter's Tale is "exit pursued by a bear." This is an 18th century Doré reproduction of that particular scene. And we said, okay, if you want to go out the exhibition, you have to exit and you're going to be chased away by a bear. And that's literally what we did. So when you went through that door, that was your final moment of experiencing the exhibition, and there exactly it was. I just want to come back to the Medieval Women exhibition. I have to say, the gallery at the British Library is actually quite awkward to use. It's a strange shape, it's subterranean, it has these great pillars banging in the centre of the gallery. It has low ceilings in some space. It's an awkward shape, and no exhibition has ever potentially used it perfectly. We keep going back and redefining how we're going to use the exhibition space. But for the purposes of a Medieval Women exhibition, one of the kind of key instructions we gave to our designer, how can we open up the gallery? It may not have actually culminated in the final product, but what they came up with was this overall design: have an empty space, create a town square in the middle of the exhibition. Each facade represented a different element of a woman's life, either the domestic realm or the public realm or the spiritual realm. The designer did imagine at the beginning that people were going to be able to free flow around the space, but that becomes a bit difficult when you're dealing with thousands of visitors, and that's how sometimes you create what effectively is a prescriptive visitor journey. And here is the actual sort of oversight of the actual plan of that particular exhibition. So you see the town square in the middle and divided into 4 different sections. One of my bugbears as a curator is that despite my best attempts, the conclusion of an exhibition is always the last thing that the designer will turn their attention to. Even if I raise it at the first time, in the very first meeting that we have, everybody is really focused on getting every other element of the exhibition done and dusted. And the conclusion, every time I've worked on a big exhibition, has been left till the last moment. Maybe hasn't happened or materialised in the way that I want it to happen. But as I've already mentioned, I think how people first see the exhibition, how that determines the speed that they go around the exhibition, and finally how they exit the exhibition are 2 really fundamental things. I'm also really focused on what I would term as creative display. This was an object in the British Library exhibition. This is actually a manuscript. It was made in the 12th century by a nunnery in Germany. It's actually a double-sided piece of parchment, and you can see it from both sides. And that's actually rather difficult because, if you can see a painting in an exhibition, inevitably you don't see the back of the painting. And so what we wanted to do was to display it in such a way that visitors could see both sides, maybe not simultaneously. The designer created this, what I would say was a beautiful aperture, a window through which you could see it from one side and see it from another. Much to my regret, we also provided a slight challenge, was that this is really important, this object, just to say, this is the only surviving piece of art from a particular nunnery, which is really, really significant in terms of art history in the 12th century. They produced a magnificent book, which was unfortunately destroyed in the siege of Strasbourg in 1870. It was destroyed in a bombardment Why that manuscript was so, it's called the Garden of Delights, and why that manuscript was still absolutely so important. Somebody fortunately made a facsimile of some of its pages in the 19th century, and we reproduced some of those pages below there. I wanted them reproduced at sort of page size, and that was actually decided it couldn't actually be done, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to see here. But on the bottom right hand here, somebody in the nunnery in the 12th century actually drew a portrait of every single nun and named them, and they each have different faces. So if you did go up to them closely, you would have been able to see some of them were called Helen, strange enough, or a variation. Another thing of creative display, we had certain objects in the British Library. So on the left is a scroll. This is called a birthing girdle. This is a charm or amulet which a woman would have worn around her belly when she was given birth to provide her with protection. Conventionally, a manuscript like this would have just been displayed flat at the base of the case. And what we wanted to say, we said at the outset, no. How can you demonstrate to people that this is how this object would have been used? So our map makers actually, the lady in the striped top on the right there, and she came back and came up with this idea of actually displaying it in a scroll, but in a way that would imply and demonstrate how that object would have been used. And likewise, we wanted to show the lengths of some documents. Some of our manuscripts are meters in length, and hanging them on a wall in this particular way was another way of enabling people to see the physicality of the object. Another challenge that we confronted at the British Library's Medieval Women exhibition was how to interpret the items. We tried to do that in various ways, by providing quotes, by writing conventional labels, by giving facts and figures. So this is the kind of idea. It was done in different ways, but it was kind of a way like, let's just say this is a fact about from a particular era, a particular lifespan, a particular group of women. Famously, for example, there's a document in our exhibition which actually listed the payments for women working in the fields in Lincolnshire in the 1480s. It lists the payments for both men and women. And of course, ironically, men were paid more for a day's work than women were paid. And there are various reasons for trying to explain that. Perhaps women weren't actually in the field for the whole time because they had other duties. They were looking after the home, childcare and so forth. Perhaps they carried less. But these are little facts and figures which potentially lodged in people's minds. And again, immersion, interaction, again, just little cunning, subtle ideas. I do love the idea of getting our audiences to actually interact and to think for themselves and add a piece of themselves to the exhibition. So in the Shakespeare exhibition at the Library of Birmingham, we recreated a wall from Verona in Italy where people actually till today go up and write an inscription on the wall. And what we got people to do was just to write something on a post-it note, write something about a person that they loved. And they left all kinds of incredible love messages, both to their partners, both to their children, people who have been really important in their lives, people who are alive, people who are dead, to animals and so forth. But it really sort of like had that emotional response. And it didn't cost very much either, a few packets of Post-its. And if you did go to the British Library exhibition, we did create certain sort of like immersive and sort of touch points where you could actually interrogate different elements of medieval women's lives. This was an interaction like, so you want to divorce your medieval husband. And what we discovered were there were different law codes across Europe which gave different reasons why you could divorce your husband. The Welsh one is one which always lodges in my mind for one reason. A woman in medieval Wales could divorce her husband within 7 years of a marriage, providing one of three different factors were recognised. One was if her husband's breath stank. Second was if he suffered from leprosy. And the third was if he was impotent. And it then gave a very long and detailed description of how you'd actually go about proving that the husband was impotent. But it did demonstrate that, despite the fact that there were often lots of obstacles to a woman parting from her legal husband, at certain times in medieval Europe, in certain countries, Iceland and so forth, there were different practical reasons why a divorce could be enacted. And I really do like the idea of playing with people's senses across an exhibition. As we say, books are inanimate objects, and once you've seen a dozen, they can be a little bit tiring. So play around, intersperse and put objects, video and so forth. And at the British Library exhibition, we recreated this scent design. This was using a genuine medieval perfumery recipe. And people could come and smell that in our exhibition. And again, that was a way of involving the audience, getting them to think about medieval life in a different way. When we did our audience testing at the very beginning of the exhibition, the potential audience said, what do they think about medieval women? And they said, well, predominantly they were all witches. They were involved in crafts like basket making and weaving. And secondly, that they didn't wash. And this was incredible. So we wanted to demonstrate, based on that learning, we wanted to demonstrate that actually women did genuinely take care of their appearance. And another thing that we always strive to do is, an exhibition, a physical exhibition, only has a limited lifespan. At some time, it will come down and it will disappear, and then its residue will remain in your head. But how do you create a legacy of your exhibition? Maybe a book, and maybe a website. The case of medieval women, we created effectively a kind of cartoon, an animation, focused on 5 different women across history and telling their stories. It was undeniably aimed at younger people, younger audiences. We had people in the United Kingdom at school, the ages 11 and 12. They do study the Middle Ages and medieval women as part of the curriculum. So it was really important to sort of impress upon people these are the stories of these particular women. And as we say, what is our ultimate goal? Bringing people in to see your exhibition. I love your description of the glass coffins. Oh, we do absolutely know they are an obstacle, but they are a fact of life at the moment at the British Library and at other institutions and organisations. But this was our Magna Carta exhibition, and at least you can see from a personal point of view, from a perspective of a curator, bringing people into your exhibition means that people are going to learn about your subject, and that's a powerful, emotive reason for me wanting to create exhibitions such as this. We have a new exhibition on display at the British Library. It's called Unearthed: The Power of Gardening. I have absolutely no responsibility for this exhibition, but I just wanted to show you a couple of slides to show different ways that exhibition's taken things forward. This is an example of a case at the beginning of the exhibition. The opening of that exhibition is designed actually to look like a garden shed. And what I really loved was the display cases were actually made out of wood. There's actually, the exhibition smells physically like you're outside in a garden. And I did really like that. And I particularly thought the sustainability factor in that exhibition was really, really paramount. Again, creating creative displays. So you have opportunities to look beyond the items. You display them in sort of creative and innovative ways, and you use interpretation in a way that you are, this exhibition was created in partnership with local communities. They are really fundamental to the way that the British Library is designing exhibitions and co-curating exhibitions and getting their personal experiences and showcasing them in the gallery. And again, as I've said, I really, really, really support the idea of using sound and vision in order to tell stories, so that you are also keeping everybody constantly sort of changing direction, but sort of testing people's senses in different and innovative ways. A downside of that, and dare I say, and this absolutely reflects the way that everybody has a different approach to life in particular, or to go around an exhibition. We tend to get 2 kinds of complaints at the British Library about our exhibitions. constantly after every exhibition. One is that the sound in your exhibition is too loud. It's affected people, and they generally cannot concentrate on looking at the books because they've got some sort of soundtrack or words being spoken in their ears. And the opposite is that the sound is too quiet, and they want to have more, and it's really interesting, and you can't. I also remember the time of our Magna Carta exhibition, I often have to field as a curator sort of inquiries and complaints from visitors. And I definitely remember in the Magna Carta exhibition being sent a complaint, and one person said, I don't like your exhibition because there's too much about King John in your exhibition. King John, who grants Magna Carta. There's too much about King John. And the same afternoon, I received a second complaint, and they said, there's not enough about King John in your exhibition. And I just wanted to, how can I put these two people together? And if you've ever been involved in an exhibition, they do create these very valuable summative evaluation reports based on sort of impact and talking to the visitors and questionnaires and so forth. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but this is the kind of thing that they like to produce, dare I say, often sort of like skewed in positive terms to demonstrate what really worked well. Something like the Medieval Women exhibition, the idea that it changed people's perceptions of the British Library, for some cases actually adversely, but primarily it changed their perceptions of what the British Library did, what its collections were, and how it interacted with different audiences and different communities. And these were some of the comments, and I obviously do not have to read all of these, but I do like the different range of words, such as people talked about things being awe-inspiring and resonating, and a comment just like, I didn't learn any of this at school. Of course we have a lifetime learning journey, and these are things which really, when we talk about how we try to create the exhibition, I think these outcomes at least bring a smile to my face. And this is an example of a good response form. And I like the fact that this particular person, this wasn't a relative of mine, I hasten to add, but they did tick the compliment box. And I just, this is how we always focus on, full of insights, well selected, well shown. Congratulations to the curators. And people don't often say that. So, thank you so much. And likewise, again, from a marketing point of view, the moment that somebody gives a positive review of their exhibition, we had all of the reviews which did come out, all gave the exhibition the highest possible accolades, for which we were extraordinarily grateful. Indeed, in particular from national newspapers, some of which had completely different political perspectives from both the left and from the right, but they also found something really interesting, and they really, really appreciated the exhibition. So those are good things. Sometimes reviews are really less good. I remember, again, for the Magna Carta exhibition, I essentially focused as a medieval historian on the first half of the Magna Carta exhibition because it was presented chronologically up to around the year 1600. And other colleagues worked on the modern impact of Magna Carta. And one review of the exhibition always sticks in my mind. It said, you can give the first half of this exhibition a complete miss, but the rest of it was okay. But hey, 5 stars, don't worry. I'm going to be joining one of the panel discussions tomorrow, but I just wanted to share with you a few things that I've been allowed to share on behalf of the British Library. Naturally, the library does think about exhibitions strategically. I can't share with you the full deck of these particular slides, but we have created a new exhibition strategy in collaboration with the exhibitions team, the marketing team, and the curators. And that is this focus on what they're talking about, exhibition typologies. Now, marketing people do think differently to curators and do think differently to people from different spheres. But it just demonstrates that not every exhibition is supposed to function in the same way. Exhibitions can have broader, different types of ambitions, different kinds of audiences. There is no harm in putting on an exhibition which doesn't actually have so many visitors, but may appeal to different audiences, people who haven't been in the building before. And again, this was something I pulled out of our exhibition strategy, and these are some of the ideas for how to improve the actual visitor experience. And again, I imagine that many of these are quite common to the way we as a group collectively will consider creating exhibitions. Of course, people want to actually physically touch the book and handle them and turn the pages. Or how can we have better digitized materials in our exhibitions, creating sensory encounters, and then finally, and again, fundamentally, creating new partnerships, always pushing the boundaries. I like these words, amplifying our cultural ambitions. I wanted to finish with this particular slide. This is actually from when the Harry Potter exhibition, after it being in London, it went to both New York and it went to Japan. And I just wanted to tell a little story. I generally cannot find a slide of how this was displayed in London. So this comes back to when the exhibition was displayed in New York. And as a curator, I'm always trying to be a bit cheeky and a bit playful. And among our team discussions, one day, we suggested, would it be possible, could we display an invisibility cloak in our exhibition? And strangely, that was my idea. My colleagues didn't like that idea at all. They just, Julian's at it again. He's just gone off on one. And so the idea was kind of like quietly put to one side. But what then subsequently happened was that all the ideas and all the different objects had to be passed by the agency which represents J.K. Rowling, because she didn't actually take a hands-on sort of curatorial approach to the exhibition. They actually had a reputation for saying no to lots and lots of different things. It was quite difficult to get anything past them. But when it came to the invisibility cloak, they put absolutely not under any circumstances, because it may give people the impression that an invisibility cloak actually exists, and we didn't want to give people that impression. And at that point, strangely enough, our exhibitions team did a complete 180-degree turn, said, we are going to do it. And so what did we do? The idea was quite simple. Let's put an empty case in your exhibition. Let's put a label on it. In order to show that there is an object on display, let's put a coat hanger or a stand or something, and let's pretend that there is an invisibility cloak on display in the exhibition. So that's what we did in London, and that carried over into the New York exhibition. As a curator, what I loved was to watch people going up. There were other cases, there's labels here, where's the object? And they were looking around, trying to work it out. And the label was slightly, it said, if you look very carefully, it just shimmers in the light. And and obviously what happened then, people would laugh and smile. And this happened continually until one day, and this is inevitable with children, an 8-year-old girl, I imagine that was her age, came up to me. She was really angry. She was shaking her head. No, she said, no, that's completely wrong. She said, the point about the invisibility cloak is not that the cloak itself is invisible, but it makes you invisible when you put it on. And touche, and I still remember that. Thank you.